Hello and welcome to another Improve Your Chess video. And once again, I'll be discussing how to get better at chess. So in this series, I play a good friend of mine, John, and he's still learning all the strategy and tactics and everything in chess, so he's still improving, and we'll see what happened in this game. I had the black pieces and John had white, and it looks like I played at 90.2% accuracy and he played at 78.3%. So we'll see what happened in this game. It looks like 5 inaccuracies for John, 4 for me, and we each had 2 mistakes, but he had a miss and a blunder. So, how to get better at chess? Well, one way is going over games like this. You can watch videos. Going over your own games will really help, especially if you try and figure out what mistakes you made. I would recommend doing that on your own first before you put it in the computer and let the computer just give you the answers. Because then you have to think a little bit on your own and try and figure out what you're doing wrong before you just let the computer tell you everything. All right, so let's put up the analysis and go over this game, and we can discuss the different ways to improve your chess. Now, if you're a beginner or even, all the way up to a chess master, studying tactics regularly and going over tactics on a regular basis, daily, if you can spend 10 or 15 minutes or more just doing some tactics, puzzles, and problems, that will help. So here, John starts out with e4. Now, another thing that will help you get better at chess is learning general principles in chess, like the golden rules that you should follow. So there's opening rules, there's rules in the middle game, in the end game, rules about strategy, and many different rules that you just learn by reading, watching videos, and you just kind of learn and remember them over time. So opening rules. One good rule is to occupy the center with 2 pawns. If you could get both your pawns up here on e4 and d4 to help control the center, like John did here. So this is a good move. He's controlling the center. Now this isn't the best move here, but I'm planning on controlling the center from the side of the board by developing a bishop here that will aim at the center and point towards the king side as well. So now normally, if your opponent lets you put both pawns in the center, then it's usually a good idea to go ahead and do that. But he wanted to develop a piece quickly, maybe get his bishop out and get ready to castle quick. So I attack the pawn, and he protects. Now, why is this an inaccuracy? Well, he's protecting the pawn, but he's blocking his bishop here. So another way to get better at chess is to really remember that you have to keep your pieces as active as possible. And when I say active, you have to allow your pieces to control as many squares as possible. Now, before this pawn was moved here, this bishop was controlling e2, d3, c4. It was attacking all these squares on this diagonal all the way up to a6. But now it's only attacking e2 here. So this just severely limited the scope of this bishop. Unless this bishop is definitely planning on going to e2, which is a little on the passive side, then this pawn will most likely have to be moved again, and then you just waste time. So that's something else you don't want to do. To get better at chess, you have to work on not wasting time by moving pieces more than once, unless you're forced to. So the pawn is protected. I mean, what would have been better? Maybe get the knight out. Let's see what the computer said. Yes. Develop another piece, which would help control the center, protect the pawn, and get your pieces and as many pieces developed as fast as you can out towards the center. So here I decide to do the same thing. Once again, not the best move, but I'm trying to bring both my bishops here to g7 and b7 so they fire down through the center of the board. And because John is still learning, I'm just kind of taking my time. I don't want to just start attacking all crazy right away. I just take my time and develop my pieces, giving him time, to see what he will do. All right, so here we have bishop to g5. Now, this is an inaccuracy. Why is this move not the greatest? Well, you don't know if the bishop is placed here, or placing the bishop here is best or not. Maybe the bishop would be better here, or even on e3. So until you figure out where is best to put this bishop, the knights are slower, and the computer recommends knight to c3 is a better move. And the knights are almost always well placed on c3 and f3 here because they control a lot of the center. And another problem with this bishop is that I could attack it with h6 here, driving the bishop back, and my opponent would have to waste some time retreating while I was able to develop more pieces. So first, I immediately develop this bishop, and now it's also attacking this pawn that's no longer protected because this bishop moved. So the best move is knight to c3 here, developing another piece, and the game would be about even. But instead, John moves a piece again in the opening. Now it's only a pawn, and the pawn's probably a little bit better off here, but you already moved this pawn once, and you might as well just develop another piece instead of pushing this pawn forward. Also, by pushing this pawn, now this pawn is unprotected. So I just go ahead and capture, and now c3 is played, and a better move once again would be to develop a piece, maybe bishop to d3 attacking the unprotected bishop, or knight to c3 maybe attacking the bishop. So I just retreat back, and that was the best move according to the computer. And so finally this bishop, the light squared bishop, develops. Now why is this not the best move? Well, once again, developing the other knight, because knights are slower than bishops, it's better to develop them first, and that gives you time to see where the best place will be to put your bishops as the game develops. So also with this bishop to c4 move, I could play d5, which would block my bishop, but it would also force this bishop to retreat. Now the computer says that this is a mistake, probably because it blocked my bishop. Now, the knight could maybe jump up here in the future, and this pawn cannot chase it away. But it really blocks my bishop. Now it does force him to retreat, and apparently h6 chasing this bishop would have been a little bit better. So retreat here, which is best. And now finally I attack this bishop, but now the computer's saying I need to develop my knights, which, as I mentioned earlier, you usually want to develop your knights first because they're slower. So the bishop retreats. I just start developing another pawn, and I'm trying to use a type of hippo defense setup. So that's kind of why I'm playing in this manner. This isn't the best way to play, but it gives me time to wait and see what my opponent is doing, and he's still learning. So I don't want to just go crazy and attack all of a sudden. I just kind of want to wait and see what my opponent does. That way we can learn from the different moves that he makes. So a4, gaining space on the queen side here. But castling would have been better. It's usually good to get your king castled to safety and get your rook out in the center of the board. So finally I developed this knight. We have castling, and the other knight is developed, although an immediate c5 would have been better, threatening to capture in the center, or even chase the bishop away. So queen to e2 lining up on my king. And now, this is another way that you can play better chess, is remember to line up your pieces on the king or even on the queen, lining a rook up on the queen, because if the pieces clear away, there's a possible attack. Now, this pawn can't move because it's pinned, and the computer says this is an inaccuracy, that it would have been better to bring the rook out here immediately. So I just ignore this, castle, but apparently it might have been better to... the computer actually likes knight to h5, which, from there I could maybe jump forward and attack the queen. So now we have this battery. A way to get better at chess is to figure out where to best place your rooks, because a lot of beginners especially kind of ignore their rooks. The rooks are over in the corner and they kind of forget about them. But if you can put your rooks on half open or completely open files, they'll be a little bit stronger, because not only can they move horizontally, but they can move up and down the board as well. So here we have a battery of rook and queen threatening this pawn, which is only protected by the queen. So I move here to protect, but apparently e6 would have been a little bit better. So now the other knight is finally developed. And if we take a look at this position, it says that black is in the lead here. Now, why is that? The main reason is because I was able to pick off a pawn earlier. And remember, especially you beginners out there, every little pawn is valuable. It could become a queen, through promotion that could win you the game in the end. So, don't just give up your pawns trying to attack unless you're sure that attack works and it was worth it to give up those pawns. So, further looking at the position, you can count how many pieces are developed to see who's winning the game. So here we have a rook and queen. That's 1, 2, 2 knights, 2 bishops. So 2, 4, 6 pieces are developed here. And black has 1, 2, 3, 4. The rook is kind of developed here, even though it's blocked in. So, maybe 5. I'm kind of behind in development just a little bit, but I have that extra pawn. So that's why black is ahead here. And now the game continues with g5, chasing the bishop, although c5 immediately attacking in the center might be better according to the computer. So the bishop retreats, and now I should have immediately played knight to h5 and knocked this bishop out, taking away the bishop pair from my opponent. So another rule that you can follow to help you get better at chess is to remember the power of the bishop pair. When you have both of your bishops, they cover all the squares on the board. The light squared bishop will cover the light squares, and dark square, the dark squared bishop, the dark squares. But if one of them is knocked out, well, then that can create a weakness on that color of squares, when you lose that bishop. And if your opponent has the bishop pair, he can use that extra bishop to his advantage. Now here, I should have immediately tried to get rid of that bishop, but instead I attacked in the center. And now that kind of swung the game a little bit in favor of white here. So now we have a blunder. Now what is happening here? Apparently, maybe this queen decided to move here and bring the bishop here and try and create an attack down through this diagonal. Maybe the queen wanted to get out of the line of fire of the rook, but a tactic can occur here now. All I have to do is just push this pawn, and it's protected by the other pawn, and I'll be forking the bishop and the queen. So if you really want to get better at chess, one of the fastest ways that you can improve is to just do tactics problems, puzzles, problems, read books on tactics, watch videos on tactics. And it might get boring after you do them over and over and over again, but you kind of just have to keep grinding away at them. And over time, you'll start to see patterns that you'll remember as you see those tactics more and more, especially this pattern here of being able to fork these two pieces. So what should have been played here instead of this queen move? Well, it looks like knight to e5 was the best move. So instead, improving the position of this knight. And now the knight jumps on this outpost here. Now I could capture, but then my bishop could jump in here on the outpost. And so, anytime you can improve the position of your pieces, now if we look at the two knights, both of us have a knight on the second rank here, but now this white knight is better than my knight here on f6. So if you can improve the scope and the activity of your pieces, put them on better squares than your opponent, then that'll help you get better at chess and win more games. All right. So this would have been the best move, and then I should play, looks like e6, just to fortify my central pawn. We could capture in the center here. But anyway, back to this blunder. Now this is a blunder because I can push forward, forking the queen and the bishop. Now, if this pawn wasn't here to protect the advancing pawn, of course this wouldn't work. So you have to remember, if you can fork with a pawn, especially if another pawn is protecting, now my opponent has to decide what to do. You don't want the queen to be captured, so you're kind of forced to either retreat the queen or capture this pawn. And a way to get better at chess is if you find yourself in a problem where you're going to lose material anyway, you might as well take as much material with you as you can and do it in the most advantageous way. So here, you don't want to give up your bishop and capture with the bishop, because right now you have the bishop pair, and this knight is sitting back here on the second rank. So the best move is to capture with that knight, which is what my opponent did. So good on him for finding the best move. And now I go ahead in material, and after he captures with his bishop, now his bishop is a little bit better than it was, aiming down through a open board, but he did give up a knight for 2 pawns. So now I'm ahead by 2. I have a knight and 1 pawn, and he has only gotten 2 pawns in exchange, overall in material. And that's the way you can win. If there's not a direct attack on the king, you can't just charge in there after the king because the king is well defended. Well, then you have to look and see how you can gather material, capture material and get ahead in material. And that's another way to get better at chess. If you can't go after the king immediately, then try and grab pawns and pieces if you can. So here I played knight to h5, and now the computer says this is a mistake, that e6 would have been better. So if we go back, e6 kind of blocks the scope of the bishop. What should my opponent play here? Well, it looks like h4 would be the best response. Trying to break open these pawns in front of my king and kind of knock out some of my pawn cover. And maybe open the h-file up for rooks in the future, maybe. All right, so I decided to try and knock out his bishop pair, and my opponent jumps forward. A missed opportunity here. So what should have been played? Apparently, knight takes g5, which, that kind of move is probably hard to see here. So why should that be played? Knight takes g5. Oh, yeah, that could have caused some problems. So I kind of overlooked this attacking possibility by my opponent, and unfortunately, they overlooked it as well. So once again, tactics. And we'll see why here that tactics are very important. You should always be trying to improve your tactics. So here, the recommendation is this. Capture. And then, let's see, it wants me... Apparently, just to recapture is best. And now I'm ahead by +4 in material. But we have this move. Queen to g6. Attacking the unprotected knight. And attacking this pawn here. So, knight at h to f6 apparently is the best way to go. You'd think, would you want to just knock out this bishop? Well, that might, after the f-pawn captures, that could open up more lines here. And we already have a queen and bishop both attacking here. I can't capture the queen because the bishop is pinning it to my king. So, e6, we could block in that manner. Knight at h to f6. They like that the best. But, this seems safer. Let's see what happens if we do that. So here we have capture. Oh, and then you're forking the rook as well. So king over to h8. Instead of picking off the rook, they like capturing the pawn instead here. Interesting. All right. Oh, because the bishop can drop back and then you can threaten here possibly. All right, I'm not going to dig too much deeper in that. We'll just continue on and see what actually happened in the game. So if I go back, I attacked here. The knight jumped forward, and something you don't want to do if you're behind in material is trade more pieces. Because if you're behind and you just trade more and more pieces off the board, that's less of a chance you have to come back and come back from a losing position. So right now I'm ahead in material, and the more I trade off, I'm just going to be ahead at the end of the game. So when you're behind in material, you want to trade off pawns and keep as many pieces as you can. But if you're ahead like I am, I want to just trade off pieces. So I go ahead and capture here, get rid of the pair of knights. The bishop captures. Now I can just trade off even more material if I want to. But first, I play this e6 move to block the scope of the bishop. And my opponent kind of helps me a little bit here by trading more material. So I recapture with the king. It looks like it would have been better to jump forward here attacking the queen first. But now it's saying that this is best. So I just capture, and then the game continues with g3. Now, what did this do? I guess my opponent saw that if the knight forked the queen and this pawn, my knight could capture the pawn perhaps with the backup strength of this bishop also piling up on that pawn. So that's why this move was played, because bishop and knight, could possibly pile up on that pawn. All right, but it does create weaknesses here. So now I jump my queen up, thinking, maybe I can get over here and try and take advantage of these weak squares around the king. And rook moves over here, lining up on my queen. So I jump up here to block this pawn from being able to push forward, and try to trade more pieces off to give my opponent less material to fight back and try and end up making a comeback with. But it looks like e5 would have been better. So if I do that, that would kind of open the position up. Apparently d5 would be good because it would block the scope of my bishop. But I don't know about that, because then I could bring my rook over and line it up on the pawn. So in the game, they recommended d5, then queen over to d6 to immediately block this pawn from moving any further and block the scope of the bishop. And now bishop to b3, which allows the other pawn to protect this pawn here. Before I start piling pieces up on it, like the knight back to f6. All right, back to the game. We were in this position here where I'm threatening a mate. So checkmate is threatened and the queen is under attack. So my opponent captures, which is best. And then I recapture. And so I've succeeded in trading more pieces off the board and holding on to quite a bit of pawns. I still have 6 pawns left. My opponent has 7, but I have an extra knight. So I need to figure out how to use that extra knight and get my rook into the middle of the game here. So my opponent makes the best move. As I mentioned, the rooks, you have to get them on open or half open files, or get them behind pawns that you're going to push forward later in the game. So my knight wasn't really doing much on the edge of the board, so I wanted to bring it back towards the center. But it would have been better to get my rook on an open file and attack the bishop. So the bishop retreats, but this just lets me trade off more material, which is best. And now I bring my rook over here to the half open file. That way this pawn cannot push forward, or I would just capture it. So now we have a pawn moving forward, which this move is, the computer says it's excellent. It keeps my knight from being able to jump forward, although f4, the computer says that's best, trying to trade more pawns off, which I mentioned. When behind in material, if we got rid of all the pawns and traded the rooks off and I just had an extra knight, you can't win with that extra knight and king versus a lone king, if there's nothing else on the board. So another way to get better at chess is learn what endgames are winning, what endgames are drawn, and that'll help you be able to steer the position towards the endgames that are good for you and bad for your opponent. All right, so we put both the rooks on the half open files. The pawn pushes forward here, blocking my pawns. But I move my knight into the center, the best move. From here it can jump forward up to f4. So rook to c1 here. Computer says it's excellent, but a better move apparently is rook to e4 here. Anyway, moving on. The knight attacks. Excellent move, but b5 might have been better here. Maybe opening a line up. It if they capture and we recapture, then we could fight for the open A file. So the rook was under attack and moves here. Let's see. All right, so the rook moves. I push forward. Now this is another way to get better at chess in endgames. And I have trouble with this sometimes myself. Watch out for the rooks, the power that they have through pieces. So you can't capture this pawn here. Otherwise, I'll just pick off the rook. So the pawn is pinned to this unprotected rook. If the pawn tries to push forward, well, then I can just capture because I'll have the knight backing me up. So we have this doubling of the rooks. So now the rook is protected. I capture, which is best. And we have a recapture towards the center. So we've traded off some pawns. And this also gives me the open C file to work with potentially with this rook. And the knight is preventing this pawn from moving forward. If the pawn moves forward, well, I guess the pawn could still move forward. Because if we capture, there's two rooks attacking and only one defending. All right, so we blockade with the rook. A lot of times it's better to blockade with a knight. But in this position, it looks like the rook blockade is a little bit better because we were getting ready to double rooks maybe, drop the knight back, and then we'll have 3 attackers and only 2 defenders unless the knight or the king, excuse me, can get up here in time to help defend. And so that is what my opponent attempts to do, to get up here and help defend this pawn. But it looks like rook to e1 might be a little bit better, just immediately grabbing an open file here. So I add pressure from the side here, and I'm also forking 2 pawns. So we have a protect, this move protects the pawn over here. And it looks like a5, just pushing forward, would have been a little bit better. But then I would just be able to capture. Maybe, because if I would capture with the rook, then this pawn could start trying to run forward. So I find the best move. My rook was under attack. I move here. Now I'm attacking this. And, probably a blunder here, not a blunder, but a bad move by my opponent. Even though it says it's excellent, now this is under attack. But if one of the rooks would have moved, well, then I could just capture this pawn anyway. So, there's probably nothing you can do about this pawn falling, or one of the pawns falling. So I capture with check. The king moves forward, but it looks like it would have been better to retreat back to f2. So now we just put pressure back on this pawn. We have the rook moving over to protect here. So my king jumps up in the game. So another way to get better at chess is use your kings in the end game. Because if there's only a few pieces on the board and some pawns, the king can make all the difference in the end game. And we'll see exactly what I mean here in the way this game ends. So you're already seeing there's a possible mate in 1 here. So take a look and see if you can find out how that might be possible. All right, so a blunder or a mistake here, but I would say that this is a blunder because it allows the mate in 1, which is rook to e5. So a crazy kind of end to this game. And once again, tactics. The tactic of the pin here. This pawn can't capture the rook because it's pinned by this rook. And the king jumped up into the game to assist and protect the rook. So the king can't capture either. And the knight is helping prevent the king from escaping. So how could that have been avoided? Well, instead of that rook move over there, the only way to last longer is for the king to go back to e3 here. And then what would be best? The computer recommends dropping my king back to g7 here. I don't know about that. I mean, you could just drop your knight to e6, and then you have 3 pieces piling up on this pawn, and you would be able to knock this pawn out, perhaps. So, rook to b3 check. That might be a good move as well, because the king would have to drop back even further. So, yes, if you want to get better at chess, tactics. Study tactics, and then you can avoid the ending of this game with this crazy tactic. It's good to bring your king out to help, but just make sure you don't get stuck in a checkmate position like this. And if there's queens on the board, you might want to think twice before you charge your king up the board if the enemy queen can harass your king and chase it around, especially if there are forking opportunities, which a lot of times there can be with a queen on the board. All right, well, those are some of the ways you can get better at chess. Study those tactics. You can do that by solving puzzles regularly in books, on chess.com or wherever. And just watch videos about tactics, and more tactics will definitely help you improve. And sometimes it'll get boring studying so many tactics, but it definitely can make a difference. And then you want to study endgames, strategy, because a lot of people, they like openings. They want to find opening traps and fun openings, and that's fine to learn openings and traps and everything. But as you improve and you're playing better and better players, they won't fall for any easy traps so much. It'll be harder for your traps to work, and you end up having to learn how to play solid openings. And also, you can waste a lot of time just trying to memorize a bunch of moves in the opening. And instead of using all that time for that, you could study more tactics and learn general principles in chess. Like control the center of the board, get your king to safety and castled quickly, put your rooks on open or half open files where they're more active, like this rook here. This one is up here attacking, on a half open file, and it's attacking horizontally. Place your knights on outpost squares like this, where they, especially if they're in the opponent's position and they can't be chased away by any pawns, because there's no pawns that can attack this knight. And also, don't give up material, unless you have a good reason to. Try not to lose even pawns unless you're sure that you get some compensation for the material that you're giving away. All right, well, feel free to leave any comments that you would like. You can continue watching this series where I play more games against my good friend John as he's trying to improve his chess game. And hopefully it'll help you learn some as well. All right, well, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you for watching, and have a super chess day.